It's Binjang 91.5. We're in Studio 2, where we've got Matthew Dickerson with Tech Talk on Binjang. So I'm your host, Tony Graham, and let's get to the first question, Matthew.
Excellent, Tony. Sounds great.
Yes, now Victoria is about to become the number one in the Southern Hemisphere with what? They've already got a few, but no, not with COVID-19, but with some important infrastructure.
Very
So
important
what,
infrastructure.
what is that going to be? And I might add, before you come up with your answer, I know that New South Wales is going to be doing the same thing.
Yeah, New South Wales might be lagging in this, but hopefully they'll finally start to catch up, and they need to, because South Australia's got a big one, and now Victoria will have an even bigger one. They'll be the home to the largest battery in the Southern Hemisphere. And this is all part of this state government push from Victoria to transition to renewable energy. The battery that was installed in South Australia, and that was about, I think, 2017, might have been 2018 in South Australia, out at Hornsdale Power Reserve. This one will be about twice the size of the battery over there. 450 megawatt hour battery is going to be installed. And the idea is that they're going to give some more reliability to the network, but also to reduce the actual energy bills. And so some people have questioned that, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But the reality here is that this is all about making sure you've got reliable power over summer. And as you start to bring on more and more renewable power, then sometimes you don't have that consistency of power. So a battery or some form of ability to turn power on and off quickly is really important in that whole mix. This particular project, the batteries here will give you enough power to power 500,000 homes for about an hour. Now, it's not going to be used specifically to just say, oh, there's 500,000 homes, let's power them for an hour. It's obviously to give you that reliability, consistency. It might only be used for 3 minutes, 5 minutes here, 30 seconds there. It's just a variety of different interjections from the batteries to be able to even out that power supply. When you look at the analysis from South Australia, and this is what the Victorian government is relying on, the analysis from South Australia says that once you had this particular battery installed in South Australia, then more renewable power could be used, which ultimately drove down the pricing. And that's what we've seen in South Australia, that price has gone down. And that's where they're basically aiming for Victoria. And the idea is obviously to get off coal and keep progressing that transition away from coal, and this is an important part of it. So biggest in the Southern Hemisphere, probably about another year, a bit more than a year away before it'll be finished in installation, but all part of that recovery, the recovery after COVID-19 from the renewable sector, which is an important part of the overall recovery.
Yeah, well, look, these batteries are being used to smooth out the network, to keep the voltage regular and to keep the power supply regular. And I might add, in South Australia, they want to bring down the prices because they're horribly high after how they've managed the renewable energy in South Australia, and they've had to install big diesel generators to generate electricity over there when they run short as well. So they've got a long way to go there.
They have, but a consultancy firm did do a quick review on the installation of the Tesla battery and the impact that had. And they came up with a figure that since the installation, it's saved about $150 million for consumers, which is a pretty impressive figure. Again, I don't know the exact details of that consultancy work that was done. The cynic in me might say it was commissioned by the South Australian government, so the results are going to be favourable for the installation. But the figures are there, and hopefully we'll keep seeing this drive forward as we move into the renewable energy space.
Yeah, well, I guess one day it'll move beyond the smoothing of the power grid to actual storage for powering the power grid on a much more regular basis. But we're not there with that yet, but that's the future. And certainly smoothing out the energy, and particularly as solar energy comes onto the grid, where that's creating other issues, it's a fairly important thing to do, is to have a battery. And of course, we've got the big water battery being developed. I think they've started on Snowy 2 now too.
Yeah, that's right. Hydro is certainly a very important way to store power as well, and very efficient. You don't lose a lot in the storage of power in a hydro environment. It's a bit tougher when you get to places like our region though, Tony. You need a bit of height, you need a bit of a dam to be able to store power, yes. And we don't have a lot of hills around to actually be able to pump that water back uphill to then drop it back down. So in some environments, a battery or other forms might be better.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Now, interesting one here. We've heard about a lot about Elon Musk and all his great ideas. And even though he's done a lot of talking, he's also done a lot of doing, I might add. Now, so the question is, who's winning the vacuum tube transport system race? Is it Virgin Hyperloop or is it SpaceX Hyperloop?
Well,
And
Tony,
SpaceX
I would
is
have
part of
said,
Elon Musk.
correct, I would have said a couple of weeks ago that SpaceX, with Elon Musk there driving the way forward, was in the lead in terms of those two organisations. They've done a few tests, they've done some trials, they've had some competitions, and so it was all looking good from that perspective. But Virgin Hyperloop has now done their first trial with passengers. SpaceX hasn't actually had passengers in any of their modules or their capsules yet. So I would say that Virgin's jumped ahead a little bit now. They've only done a short test, and obviously part of the problem when you talking about having pods travelling along through a tube at maybe 1,000 kilometres an hour, part of the test is being able to get up to that speed in a fairly short period of time without putting too much stress on the human body. You don't want people getting in and then passing out from the G-forces they might be subjected to. So this particular test was only run along a 500-metre test track. It only took 15 seconds for the test, and it only reached speeds of 172 kilometres an hour, which isn't that impressive at this stage. But in a first test, and again with that short test track, that's been okay. There were two employees of Virgin's Hyperloop that were on that first test. They were obviously maybe people that weren't behaving themselves, and so they got subjected to the test. I'm not sure how they chose those two, but they were naturally very complimentary of the experience they had. They didn't feel sick. They got in and got out, and everything worked fine. So it's another step along the path. Trains in, say, Japan, the world record's held by a Japanese train back in about 2015. They set that record of almost 600 kilometres an hour. The idea of Hyperloop is to get ahead of that, a long way ahead of that. And you can imagine at 1,000 kilometres an hour, you're up there at speeds similar to planes. Of course, the big downside of the Hyperloop concept is that you've got to build the infrastructure from point A to point B. A plane can fly from point A to point B without a tube being built, just needs somewhere to take off and land. So there's some advantages for planes, obviously. There's some advantages for Hyperloop. And again, you would only build it logically between 2 points that were very busy points. But the time to build the infrastructure, I think, is one thing that might keep this to some very niche markets or some markets that really suit it. But the competition goes on, and let's see who kind of gets ahead in the next iteration of these particular concepts.
Yes, that's interesting. Now, on the subject of batteries, which are advancing slowly at the moment, how can a dash of potassium help me drive further when it comes to that additive in a battery in a car or wherever else it might be used?
Well, some researchers have found that a dash of potassium could actually help us make longer lasting batteries, and probably specifically they've been focusing on electric car batteries. That's one where we really want the maximum performance and maximum range. One of the things that's interesting at the moment is that lithium ion is mainly used for batteries in our phones, for example, and in our cars. Lithium metal batteries are actually better. They can give you better range out of batteries. They'll be able to charge quicker. They'll be more efficient in their use. They've just got a minor problem in that when you start to use lithium metal batteries for too long, they have this tendency to catch fire, which researchers probably think is not the best advertising for a new battery composition, if you like. So the researchers have found if they're actually using a little bit of potassium when they make the lithium metal batteries, it stops the build-up of some certain components on the batteries, which then can actually protect that battery and allow you to have a better battery, better charge time, a better range, a whole range of advantages without the risk of the battery short-circuiting and catching fire. So research is still only in its early days at this stage, but it looks pretty promising, and it's just a matter of getting the mix right. How much potassium do you need? What's the composition, the exact composition that you might need? So research is going on, but rest assured that the lithium-ion batteries we've got in our cars now, jump forward 5 years, Tony, and I think we'll have something just a little bit different, maybe not dramatically different, but just a little bit different in our cars, giving us better range, giving us better charge times, a whole range of advantages that people are looking for in electric car batteries. Potassium may well be part of that mix.
Yes, and I know that Elon Musk is looking at changing the architecture of these lithium batteries to make them more dense and therefore in the same, have a denser charge capacity, should I say, for storage. So that would mean that in the same space they could put a battery with a bigger range, and adding these little things to it, certainly things are going to move ahead, aren't they?
Yeah, they are moving ahead now, and it's always that constant battle they've got, battery manufacturers. You want to make them denser, you want to get more charge in them, you want to get better range out of them, but when you make them denser, you increase the risk of that being a fire hazard. And that was what happened with, if you remember, the Samsung phone
Yeah.
from a few years ago. The
Yeah.
issue there was that they actually just made the components of the battery too close together, and you only needed a bit of movement on there or some friction or some extra heat generator from outside, and that was enough to make it catch fire. So that was an incident where they just pushed it just that little bit too far, and that cost Samsung a huge amount of money.
And you've been listening to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson on Binjang 91.5. Stay tuned next week in the mornings and in the afternoons at the same times. And you're going back to the music and all the great information.
Thanks, Tony.